could JSO officers be breaking the law by appearing in an ad supporting Mayor Lenny Curry's re-election campaign?
Some voters say yes. The city says no. On your side's Eric Alvarez joins us now to break it down in tonight's Verify.
I believe Lenny Curry has been a strong leader.
JSO officers have appeared in 2 ads supporting Mayor Lenny Curry's re-election campaign, and now some voters are asking if doing so puts them on the wrong side of the law. Pastor R.L. Gundy filed a federal complaint claiming the officers violated the Hatch Act, a 1939 federal law which says government employees must not engage in certain political activities. The officers in the ads appear in uniform, pulling no punches against Curry's challenger, City Council member Anna Brochet.
Anna Brochet is lying and playing politics with life and death.
But Jacksonville's Office of General Counsel says no city ethics rules were violated, claiming nothing in the city books prohibits off-duty uniformed officers from participating in political ads. However, that clashes with this document from Larry James, General Counsel of the National Fraternal Order of Police. It's a list of Hatch Act guidelines, which says FOP members are allowed to endorse or oppose a partisan political candidate in an ad or broadcast, and I quote, so long as the officer is not on duty and not wearing a uniform, badge, or insignia. The officers clearly appear in uniform next to a JSO car and with firearms in the holsters, yet the city insists they were off duty when the commercial was produced, so they did not break any law. The Office of General Counsel says this all pertains to a recently passed ordinance on which the OGC has not yet drafted an official opinion. The office is expected to release that opinion plus the reasons behind it. When the office does, First Coast News will make sure it's available for you to see for yourself. Eric Alvarez, First Coast News, on your side.